Welcome to the Delineation, an astrology show with Cam White.
There we go. Hello. Welcome back, everybody, to this is now episode 6 of the Delineation. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. I say us because today I'm actually going to be having a conversation with one of my really good friends, Drew Levanti. I am still going to be doing single episodes, where I'm just by myself. However, something I really want to do with this podcast / show, whatever you want to call it, is have a little bit more of that casual kind of conversation with astrologers. Me and Drew talk all the time, and I always think, he's one of those people where when we talk, it's always like, man, we should have recorded that. That would have been, just really insightful. That would have been really cool to, go back to. So I figured, why not actually start doing that? And so anyway, I have Drew on. He's a professional astrologer. I have his link to his link tree, which is like, I don't know if you guys know what link tree is, but it's like a link to all of your links. So if you go in the description below, you can hit the link tree there. You can find all of his links to all of his content, to his website. He offers horary readings as well as elections. I actually usually refer clients who are usually specifically looking for a date to Drew as well. So if you're looking for some electional work, reach out to him. Yeah, and then in today's episode too, we actually have a really cool conversation about just kind of like everything that's kind of going on in the world. Not necessarily everything, but in the context of the Aquarius stuff, not the age of Aquarius, but after this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction and kind of moving on from here, we kind of discuss what the future kind of looks like, and we kind of refer to this idea of weird being the new tradition, weird being kind of the new normal. Anyway, it's a really good conversation. I really hope you guys enjoy it. Before we jump into it, I also just want to thank this month's patrons. Let's see if I click. I knew I was going to click the wrong button. There we go. Thank you to this month's patrons for putting on the podcast. These are all producers as well. If you sign up for the producer tier on my Patreon, you get access to monthly horoscopes. They are back. So if you're looking for monthly horoscopes for your sun sign, go ahead and subscribe to my Patreon, become a patron. And yeah, with that being said, I hope you guys enjoy the show. Well, all right. How's it going, everybody? Welcome to episode 6 of the Delineation, I think. Today is a very special episode because today I have my very first guest, Drew. Drew, I fuck up your last name every time I say it. Please walk me through it. Levanti. Okay. Levanti. Drew Levanti, everybody. So just so you know who Drew is, Drew, I would actually consider Drew probably my closest astrological friend. We talk shit all the time together, and we always have a lot of great conversations around astrology. And I thought it would be really awesome to have him on the channel today. So yeah, Drew, how's it going? Tell everyone who you are. What's up? How are you?
Yeah, I'm a Leo astrologer. I don't know, like I'm like Cam's partner in Leo crime.
So also we get this a lot that like we look the same.
Yeah, it's so weird. I actually was considering shaving today just so we could avoid that, but then I thought that would be silly.
Well, I mean, like the side hair, the beard, it's just like the white dude look. Like, really,
yeah,
you can't get away with it.
I'm the gay Cam.
Yeah, exactly. And we both have very similar charts too, where he's a moon in Leo, sun in Leo, by similar degrees, and then something else.
Yeah, we basically have like we have a kite that's like the same because it's like that. That Uranus Pluto sextile with like Aquarius Sagittarius, and then we have like our sect light. Cam's is the sun, mine is the moon in like early Leo.
Exactly. He's night chart moon in Leo, day chart sun in Leo. That's the difference. Exactly.
So yeah, anyway, that just some more fire identity stuff with us kicking off the show here. But yeah, I guess we met in 2019. That was at NORWAC, and kind of like that's when astrology got like so real for me, because I realized that there are people who like this is their life, you know what I mean? And that's where I kind of like I started making astrology so like core in like my everyday life, and just seeing everything through this lens. And then I've been doing astrology like as a business since 2020, and I do a lot of electional, so like picking dates and times. Cam and I just did horary, a class on horary, so kind of branching out into a bunch of different stuff, but it's been really fun so far and like always learning. But yeah, I guess that's kind of the basics. I've been like kind of into the esoteric for my entire life, just with like a very Uranian life from the get-go.
Yeah, you have a little interesting background.
Yeah, I mean, I was like, I was just thinking about this today with like the transits that were going on in like my family's stuff in 2000 and 2001. My brother has his moon at like 20 Aquarius, and so in 2001 Uranus went over that. Ooh. And my mom kind of like, I don't know, we joined a cult. I'll just leave it at that. And so I was like into the esoteric from that perspective for a long time. Like a lot of people, I think there's a lot of people with experiences in the United States, at least, with like Christian cults, you know, like Pentecostal stuff. What? And like, I mean, or like, you know, where Jesus is a big deal, but it's still kind of like
here
not
in America. No,
in America.
No. What are you talking about?
Well, so my version of that was very like Washington State woods, like kind of old hippie thing. I don't know how else to describe it, but it was like very new age and very like this kind of fusion of like modern kind of manifestation stuff with like Eastern kind of spirituality that is like very, you know, glossed over in that kind of setting. But that's kind of like the spiritual background that I was raised in, and I took it very seriously as a kid. Like I have Jupiter and Capricorn in the 3rd house, and so my early life was, and Saturn and Pisces too, and so my early life was very like very rules oriented with spirituality, I guess. And then I had like a teenage rebellion where I was just like, fuck all this. And then I went to college and was like, yeah, that stuff was stupid. Like, it's all about like what you can verify, and had this whole kind of like materialism phase. But also like I was really interested in social sciences. And then I graduated and now I'm like super into astrology. And yeah, like I feel like, I don't know if this is a Jupiter and Capricorn thing, but there's always this like this persistent doubt that forces you to kind of look deeper into things. And yeah, I don't know if you feel that way too. I mean, I know you're ruled by that guy.
Skepticism.
Yeah, skepticism, but also like really craving belief too.
Oh, it's all I cling on to. Well, that's what I talk a lot about that. I think in like my readings when I talk about Jupiter and Capricorn, because it's just like it makes believing fun. Because it's like you really can't just believe in anything. Like you can't, like every Jupiter and Sagittarius I know, just like, and this is no offense, it must be great to have Jupiter.
Must be great.
Must be great to have Jupiter and Sagittarius. I'm just like, oh man, you know, that just sounds. It's so, you know, I make fun of my sister for this. She has, so she's a Libra rising, and she has Venus at 29 Libra with Jupiter on her Venus, and oh my god, when she meets someone, she's like, this is the best person I've ever met. This is like super great. This is, I'm like, oh yeah, like. Man, it's like versus, you know, when you have a planet like in that exaltation and that fall where it's like you want it, because it will. I also talk about too. It's like Jupiter still got to do its job, right? It's but it can't just do it in its terms. Yeah, well, I also want to go back. I forgot that we met at NORWAC. I wanted to say something because I just hung out with Kelsey.
Oh no way, that's awesome.
Yeah. What's her at? Kelsey Rose Tort. She is a great astrologer on Twitter. I don't remember her @name.
I think it's Kelsey Rose Tort, I'm pretty sure.
I didn't know she was the one that you weren't even going to go to NORWAC. She pushed you to go to NORWAC. I was like, no way.
Yeah, well, it was. I mean, so like I've lived in Chicago for a while, and that was like my first year. I went to school here, and that was my first year out of school when I met Kelsey at like a local meetup. Like she was running the astrology meetups here in Chicago, at this place that I actually live next door to right now. But anyway, I was like, I had taken Chris's course, like Chris Brennan's Hellenistic course at that point. I was just like really into astrology, and I met all these people, like including Kelsey, who were all going to NORWAC, and she was like, you should come. I was like, oh no. And then I did anyway, and it was just awesome. So yeah, she was the reason that I kind of like got into the community, and now she lives in Vegas with you, or like, so it's just funny how like these things kind of work out.
I know. I thought that was interesting. I was like, oh, well, it's also cool. I love seeing how dots get connected, right? Yeah. Like being like, oh, how did this person come into my life? How did I meet this? How to do that? It's always just, I don't know. It's a fun way of looking how the events flow.
Yeah, especially when we've met each other in person, you know, and we have like these real relationships.
Well, that's what I appreciate, I think, out of our friendship too, when it comes to the online astrosphere. And this is also why I bully everyone to like go to an actual conference. Like it changes the game when you have relationships, like friendships in real life, that, when you're just talking to someone who's, the astrology community is so big online, which is so great. However, it's totally different in real life. Like when it's an actual real relationship or a friendship, then you see, I don't know, it's cooler. It's a really cool thing that I don't think a lot of people are getting a lot about it, especially because of everything recently. But
yeah, well, totally. And I mean, we met during Jupiter and Sagittarius, which was like the last time that anything was fun.
Anything was fun.
And I feel like now, I mean, as far as like the online astro community stuff, like when Jupiter was in Capricorn, I was online. I mean, okay,
logged in.
Yeah, I was very logged in and kind of like, I got on Twitter after Norwalk when Jupiter was still in Sagittarius, and I was meeting a lot of people like through Twitter, and it was really cool. But there was like also people who I had actually met, and so that was awesome. But then Jupiter in Capricorn, and I started like making my Jupiter return, and Jupiter rules my second house, and so I was like making a business out of it at that point, and that kind of just like changed it. But now with Saturn and Aquarius, I'm like, I tweeted about this a while ago with Saturn and like before Saturn went into Aquarius, how I thought it was, everybody was doing the kind of like Aquarius. They were talking about Aquarius in that way where it's like, hold hands and sing Kumbaya, and like that's Aquarius.
Yeah.
And Saturn in Aquarius, so obviously it's going to be Kumbaya. And I was just like, guys, I think that this is going to be way more about like choosing your friends with more discernment and like being connected to fewer people in like more sound ways. And that's so much what it's been for me, is like I still move in that kind of online astrology place, but I message people one-on-one, and I like keep in touch with people through, like very, very like one-on-one ways. But have like, I'm not on Clubhouse anymore. I'm not on like the, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's it's interesting you say that, because not only did like the Mars Saturn conjunction ingress coincide with the social distance and everyone forced online, what I really went through during 2020 was and everyone kind of went through this, like their relationship to the internet was really examined in a lot of ways, like especially for me, doing horoscopes, doing online readings with people, like it was always looked at. And I read this book, and I talk about all the time, Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport, and he mentioned something that has just struck a chord ever since I read it, about how our brains we're not supposed to like know this many people. So I think when we're only just invested, I think too, with the Capricorn into Aquarius ingress, like that difference of kind of like, oh yeah, like social media, like you can do all of this, do all of that, but then when it gets to the reality, you're like, oh, that's not sustainable, that's not functional. Like, how do I actually have a more, Capricorn is so like by the book, like, oh, just follow, engage with everybody, be everyone's friend, versus Aquarius is like, well, who are you along with? Who are you, kind of not along with? What space do you need to really have? That's the big thing I've been really thinking, the social distance idea, in not only like the negative form of like, oh, more people are like isolated, but also in the positive form, like maybe we shouldn't be all super invested in with everyone all the time.
Yeah, I mean the Capricorn stuff was like, there was so much collective concern about COVID, about like race in the United States in particular. And I think that there was almost like this push to be engaged, or like if you're not engaging, you're part of the problem or something like that. And I think that there must be something in that like Jupiter Pluto conjunction, or like the whole combination of those three outer planets in late Capricorn, where it like the problems were like very clear, and I think the solution that a lot of people jumped to was like, let me just be online more. And I think that the Aquarius ingress was like, that probably isn't sustainable, or maybe we need to, like, especially with Saturn and Aquarius, like restriction around community, or restriction around the way that we like organize in groups. So I think that ingress was like pulling back a little bit in terms of, at least that's how I experienced it.
No, that's a good way of looking at it, because I've always looked at Capricorn as so much doing things by the book or by the label. And something one of the really good examples I think of when I think of last year when George Floyd died, and there was the what was it called, like the Instagram blackout that was super controversial, where everyone's like, oh, do this in order to support it, but then it turned into this whole kind of other thing where and I like what you said, engaging in order to show that community. That's a really interesting word to use. And I think with everything going into Aquarius, I like that. Well, I also like the word they use of kind of stepping back from it, because that's really what Aquarius is like, let's actually get a different perspective of here. It always reminds me of when you are like, I remember in school there was always a lot of fights in my school, and then like you see like 3 people running, and then like 10 people, then 30, and then 100, and you're like, oh, what's going on? And then you get in there, you're like, whoa, I don't want to go where everyone's going. Like there's gonna be like that's waiting for bad news, right? And I think well, it's just, and this is one of the things I want to talk about, is this whole what it's like now being in the Aquarius, in the quote unquote this age of Aquarius, like this age of Aquarius. Are we all holding hands? Are we all singing Kumbaya? Is everyone woke now? Are we all taking out our fluoride out of our water?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, I mean, it's interesting with like, I like to think a lot about Pluto transits, and, with the soon to be ingress of Pluto into Aquarius, I don't know. I've just been thinking about the way that the Pluto and Capricorn transit has been so much about like identifying problems as like systematic things and historical things that are passed down, and like the kind of the intensity of that realization and the sort of like self-reflection that comes with that. Like, how am I a part of these systems? But I'm actually not sure that the kind of self-analysis that is part of that realization of like problems as systematic, I'm not sure that like self-analysis part has like really kicked into gear fully until we get the Aquarius thing, because of the whole like Aquarius Leo axis. And like, okay, like we've like with the Capricorn Pluto transit wrapping up, it's like there are these problems that are shared and that are historical and that are like unevenly distributed across different populations. And then with the Aquarius thing, I think it's like, well, now, like, what do we do about it? Like, what part do I have to play within this group? And I think I think we're going to start, I think we've already started to see like some of the rumblings of that, but I'm just curious kind of how that Aquarius Pluto transit shows up in terms of like intensely analyzing like the way that we kind of latch onto each other in groups, and like sort of groupthink stuff, and what the stakes are for like individuality within groups. Like how do we maintain our own kind of like thought processes, and how do we manage critique within groups? Can we have some opinions in common and not others without calling each other fascists? That kind of thing.
Can we all just get along? Can we all sing Kumbaya?
I don't know if Pluto and Aquarius is going to be more like let's get along, but I think.
Well, this is something I wanted to bring up with you. I've been thinking a lot about the Aquarius stuff, and there's a lot of stuff I want to talk about this, but I've been thinking a lot about what Socrates, I think it was Socrates or Plato, I can't remember which one it was, but how he talks about how he's like, oh, I hate democracy, and it's because people are dumb, and but
yeah, classic Socrates. I mean, I actually don't know, but yeah, I'll take your word for it that one of them said that.
One of them said that like they're not a big fan of democracy, and well, the reasoning was because like that people aren't educated enough to know, like, and when you kind of get that power, right, you can make bad decisions if you're not fully aware of them. But what I kind of think is really interesting that you saw with the Mars-Saturn conjunction Aquarius was this, again, well, I mean, you saw this with the original Saturn and Aquarius ingress of like the age of the internet, this information superhighway, right? And you get, Neptune going through Aquarius, where we slowly really start to integrate a lot more media with it. And we get to the Mars-Saturn conjunction where it's kind of like we're stuck online. And I think in this day and age where we have pretty much unrestricted access to online, and I think what you're seeing in a lot of in a lot of not only communities but in systems. And I think this is the difference between Capricorn and Aquarius, is the decentralization of a system. You know what I mean? You look at Pluto through Capricorn, whether it was the government or the healthcare industry
or Amazon,
or Amazon, all of these, it's just anything big corp, big label, big business, big box has been bad. And you look at Pluto going into, I think you look at this Aquarius trend, it just seems to be more and more decentralization, more and more that power dynamic is actually in the groups of people. Like, I think something that I thought is incredible was the short squeeze that happened earlier this year, the AMC stock market thing. Like, literally Redditors made hedge fund market people shit their pants for a second. Like, that's kind of interesting, where you see the power dynamic actually shift. And I really think that Aquarius stuff is only going to bring more power into the hands of people. But I think with that power comes great responsibility. And what I think you're seeing right now is this kind of people realizing that influence. You know, more and more people have been taking more jobs online and shifting more to an online, you know, type of lifestyle, you know, being much more, you know, and this is something I've talked about with, you know, I think the death of celebrity is kind of the future, more and more people jumping up to be somebody. I think that all kind of coincides with the thing of, like, you know, the power's now not in the hands of the institutions. It really is in the hands of the people, now that there's this kind of, now that we have access to all this information. I kind of want to know what your thoughts about that as far as the decentralization aspect goes, and how people get along together now that we can mass communicate, now that we can share ideas at this kind of way. And now that it's, you know, living online was an option, I think, in the 2010s, and now it's kind of weird if you're not online in some capacity.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think about decentralization in terms of Aquarius. I mean, I hear like Cameron Allen sometimes talk about, like, and I think this is, you know, Aquarius in terms of like fragmentation, and like the way that, you know, whereas opposed to Leo, where you have like the sun and it's like the wholeness and like the oneness of that kind of self-projection, compared to Aquarius, where it's like pieces of selfhood that are like kind of like fractals and like branching out from like within a whole, but nothing ever being like totally the whole. But anyway, with decentralization, um, I think that there's like sometimes we'll like see decentralization, or we'll see centralization, like for example with Amazon or something, but we might miss ways in which there are like that's the big picture, but then with like underneath that structure there's still like decentralized kind of things going on. I just think that like decentralization and centralization are always like happening at the same time in a way. I'm trying to think of an example of this. But like with like Amazon, for example, like Amazon, you have like the corporation, and like obviously that's very centralized, but then there are all of these like little like tiny outposts of Amazon that are very like spread out. And yeah, they all answer to Amazon, but like there is this kind of this like supply chain thing where like we imagine that it's centralized because it's Amazon and that's like the label that we see, but there's still all of these like little moments along the chain of Amazon that are so like disruptable that can like those can get cut off. And part of like the decentralization phenomenon that has happened underneath that is like us realizing that maybe there is power to like disrupt or like make changes within those bigger structures, if that makes sense.
Elaborate on the what are you talking about as far as the disrupt? Are you talking about like the Saturn Uranus square that's just happening, or?
Well, I mean, like that's definitely a part of like what I think's happening right now, but it's like these things that seem so big and so like you can't take them down are actually very
susceptible.
Yeah, very susceptible to things that can happen very easily. And sometimes it does take those kinds of like, you know, Reddit or whatever, these kinds of like counter movements to intervene in that. And I think there are other things that we don't even other like parts of these kinds of big structures that I think we'll probably realize more when Pluto does go into Aquarius, of ways that like things can very easily, like these structures can very easily come down based on like small actions adding up to a lot.
So, well, that brings me. I was gonna wait till later to say this, but I'll bring it up now. So, I was watching this video. So, have you heard of the Carrington? So, you know how I talked like I've. So, for people who are listening, I tell Drew a lot of my theories, and he has to listen to them. And so, I have this one about the next Saturn Pluto opposition because we just had the Saturn Pluto conjunction. That was COVID. The last Saturn Pluto opposition was 9/11. So we got something coming up here in 15 years, and it's in Leo and Aquarius. Now, check this. I might pull up the chart for it if you're interested, but I was watching a video about the Carrington event. Have you heard about the Carrington event?
No, tell me.
So essentially the sun has solar flares. Are you familiar with solar cycles?
Yeah, like like there are solar flares every once in a while that like at a higher rate.
So when you look at Jupiter, you know how Jupiter, if you look at each line of Jupiter actually spins a different way, clockwise or counterclockwise. It's actually really cool. Well, the sun does that too, depending if it's on the north or the south pole, and it kind of like twists in this weird way. Well, its peak activity is like it has more solar flares and sunspots, right? Well, we're at a very low right now, and we're about to jump into a peak period over these next 10 years. So more solar activity. Well, what a Carrington event is we have solar flares all the time, but it's really rare where a solar flare happens at the same time that the Earth is in the path of it. We've only had this happen in recorded history once, and it was in 1859. And what had happened was, pretty much you were able to see the aurora borealis all the way in Florida. That's how much light was pretty much smacking the shit of Earth. And what it did is the telegraph had just been invented at that time. Electricity just hit the market. Like 10 people had a light bulb, and that was about it. Right. But what had happened was when that happened, all of the electricity failed. Everything blew up. It completely got destroyed. And when I looked at the astrology of that, it was an eclipse on Saturn and Leo, and Mercury
Pluto and Taurus too, right?
And it was Mercury. It was a Mercury retrograde at the same time. It was the same. It was literally the Saturn Pluto opposition of 2036, but like dimmed down a little bit. So it was like, I think. Well, and this is why I bring this up. When we have Saturn in Leo, North Node in Leo, the Mars, Leo, Mercury, like all that conjunction in Pluto and Aquarius, where let's say we all do integrate online, because that's what's going on right now. We're autonomizing jobs, decentralizing things. Everything's going to change. But if let's say something like that did happen and we really do centralize in that kind of decentralized way, and let's say all the electricity goes out and all the computers break, what happens then? How supportive were we on how supportive were those structures? How much better were those structures? So I keep looking at that 2036 date. I'm like, you can't, it's just like the Saturn Pluto conjunction. You looked at that and it was like, I looked at it as like, oh, that's going to be something, but who knows? I look back, I'm like, that was holy fuck. I'm never going to ignore a crazy big transit. And so I look at this Aquarius stuff as more decent and more tech, especially the tech and the online stuff, and how and that's also what's kind of facilitating this social distancing, the social isolation that everyone's kind of immersing and living online.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean the Saturn Pluto like activating the Leo thing, that also kind of goes back to the 1950s when Saturn Pluto conjoined in Leo. And I mean, that's when there was so much nuclear bomb testing around that time. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that
we're going down that road.
Wait, hang on. I want to make sure that I'm actually getting this right though. So I guess, yeah, it was like, I think it was the late 40s.
I think it was
Saturn Pluto conjoined in Leo.
I think it was the early 50s here. Let me double check real quick. Because I always remember that time as like, that was when Mao and Stalin mm-hmm. and all the big, like Eisenhower, all those big names were hanging around. Hold on.
Well, yeah. So I guess that combination of like Saturn
1947,
and Leo,
48.
Okay. Yeah. So that combination of like Saturn and Leo with like a hard aspect to Pluto definitely raises sort of questions about leadership and government and like who you answer to. And I wonder if like I don't know, I think that fits in definitely with like the decentralization thing that you're talking about. And then the solar flare things, I mean, that's like so kind of on the nose with just like
Saturn
Leo
and Leo.
yeah,
And an
right.
eclipse of Saturn and Leo. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
totally,
was like,
totally.
ooh.
Did you ever I remember when I was a kid, there were these stories, I think it was like a novel, these sort of like dystopian novels that were like uh there's a solar flare and everything goes away, like that's been kind of I've heard these kinds of predictions before, and nothing has ever like really happened with it, but it's always in kind of in the back of our mind. And I think with like COVID, there have been plenty of movies about like a global pandemic and kind of like this kind of end of the world pandemic thing, and then we kind of had this like brush with that. And I wonder, yeah, maybe the odds are that eventually there is kind of some kind of solar event in the long run. And yeah, I wonder if there's a need for more kind of like grassroots, like community pulling together resources to kind of like be prepared for something like that. I remember I was thinking about this in terms of like Pluto and Sagittarius, and like there's a similar kind of like that was at such a time of like globalization, but it was also a time of like a lot of anxiety about globalization and like what does this mean, like how, like now that the world is connected this way, are we more susceptible to these sorts of like breakdowns of the food chain, or the like the food distribution or whatever. And so I remember like near the end of Pluto and Sagittarius, my family and I were getting like so into local food. I mean, we were doing like sort of doomsday preparation anyway, but we started like growing our own food, and this sort of like make sure that we have like something, at least like if the grocery stores didn't have food for some amount of time, like we would be okay. And yeah, just that kind of that tension between uh, like your like how connected you are versus like how self-reliant you are, and
Yeah.
like at what scale is the reliance or the self-reliance, like is it your neighborhood block, is it your city, is it your country, is it your world, I
Or
mean,
yourself.
or yourself. I mean, I think that like I think we have to acknowledge like some level of interdependence at any point,
Yes.
like that's why that's why people exchange things with each other, is because like nobody can like provide for themselves on their own.
Yeah.
um
Well, you said, so to go back to what you said about Amazon and how like those things can really shift. Something I thought was super interesting about the Mars Saturn conjunction was that it literally stopped everything. And I don't think before that everyone realized that the whole system was only running so fast as like it was only keeping up because it was all going so fast. Like that was the only thing that kept the system going. And I think when you see that type of, I thought, what was interesting, what you're saying is just kind of like, what are you relying on when things kind of stop, when that isn't there?
mhm.
Something like Amazon, this big megacorp, if there was a solar flare and all of our phones are gone, Jeff Bezos is broke. Like he's done. That's how they make all their money online too.
Yeah.
Let's play for a solar flare. Hell, just kidding.
Well, I mean, and I mean, when you bring up Bezos, it's like, did you see the thing that was there? I saw this Twitter thread that was about like how many people it takes to maintain life on the International Space Station. And it's like there's hundreds of people like constantly problem solving just to keep like 4 or 5 people up there. And like life up there isn't even that enjoyable. But I think that's kind of like a metaphor for um like how just like how kind of fragile some things can be, and things that seem like really established, like in this Capricornian way, like, oh, this is going to last forever.
Well, it's like the Challenger explosion. Like, have you ever
Mhm.
watched videos of the Challenger explosion? It's like when everyone sees it, no one even knows like how to process. They're like, that wasn't supposed to happen. And I mean, did you also see my tweet about how the witch talk cursed the moon, and if they were cursing Jeff Bezos? Because that would be great.
Yeah, like maybe something that was like actually like
So
people could get behind instead of like hexing the moon. There was that thing, it's like the tide, something like the nodal cycle actually lines up with periods in which the moon affects the tides more or less. And so we're coming up in like the mid 2030s, like you're talking about, actually, where it's going to be a more period where the moon is affecting the tides more at that point, and so the extremes are going to be basically more extreme at that point. So lower tides and higher tides, and how because of that effect of the moon cycle combined with climate change, it's going to have there's going to be a ton of coastal flooding around that point. And so it's interesting how that lines up too with the sort of solar stuff that you're referencing. And it begs a lot of questions about how we kind of deal with that as a society.
Well, I think where I like to get fun with this is I think it begs more of a question of how do we deal with that as astrologers? because this is, I think, because you're in this, okay, in our mindset right now, it's 2021. Everybody's in the tech thing. We're going to the future. Sure, there's a pandemic, there's that going on. But it's the same thing as maybe the year 2000 in America, where everyone's it's the new millennium. And then, everything kind of goes down. I kind of look at it as well, are we, I truly, so something, I kind of want to have, I want to have Kira on here to talk about this, of how I truly believe astrologers are when you talk about source trendsetters, when you talk about source, where do people actually, there's a lot of people's ears that we're in, and those people that actually influence and do stuff, right? So
yeah, you mean powerful people who see astrologers because it works?
Yes, exactly. So we're in a lot of really important people's ears. So I think about how we have this influence that truly not a lot of people really actually have. And I go, when we look at this Aquarian, are we just fantasizing this online world, and because also too, we're white dudes from America. We've had everything great. I think it's easy. I think just from living in America, just even being born in the 90s, it's easy to see a lot of, I think, hope going into everything. There's only been expansion, versus I was kind of talking to since Jupiter's been in my fourth house, I've been doing a lot of ancestral work, and I've just been learning a lot more about the trauma of my grandparents. I'm damn, I have it really good. But
yeah.
It's fuck, what was I gonna fucking say? I just lost it.
I'm trying to remember where you're going, or where I thought you were going.
Jupiter.
The influence people with power and
influence. Oh yeah, we influence people. So we influence people. So it's are we just fantasizing about this reality of oh, things are only going to get better, or can we have a natural disaster, something that's not? And that's what I think it was cool. What I think would be interesting about a solar flare too is that, because this is one of my fears about the whole everything going green to climate change. Not that it's not too late, but I also don't know. We don't have any proof that all of these huge changes to all of our lives is actually going to change anything really. So I wonder, it's well, let's say we go all tech, right? We go all green. Let's say every car's electronic. Let's say everything's electronic now because we wanted to go green, and then the lights go out. Then my question is, what were we preparing for? You know what I mean? Were we, and this isn't to say, this isn't to I think the electric move is good. What I see the problem is, where do we go if we rely on that? And this is something that could, happen. What do we do when every system is reliant on it? And how can we influence? I think for one, how can we influence people to kind of just think more about their options and think more about where things are going? Something that I really, it's also funny you mentioned Cameron Allen, because I'm talking to him next week for the podcast.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So, but I think with the Saturn Aquarius, it's so important to kind of see that bigger road, and to see that and to see the faults and the problems with a lot of things. This is why, I'm a big person of the anti-censorship thing, because in my opinion, we're kind of, at any day, astrology can be false information, and then we don't exist no longer. So I look at, where can we be a little bit more open-minded, and I think bigger as far as looking at stuff. So I don't know, I guess, what are your thoughts on my question is, how do you look at future transits too? How do you look at that and then how do you connect the dots?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, I do way more looking at the past, honestly. But
please tell.
Well, I mean, there was something else that you were saying that I wanted to address about
How we influence?
just like when everything's reliant on like one thing and sort of like identifying those problems while Saturn is in Aquarius, like along those lines. When everything's reliant on one thing, it like amps up the sort of security mindset and like the need to protect this thing at all costs, and the way that that can feed into some like bad political outcomes. Like when you need to protect anything at all costs, then there's like, freedom can go away, or like it changes the nature of freedom when everything is reliant on like one kind of system.
Well, it's funny that you also mentioned the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in the 40s, because that was the rise of the post-World War II national security state that you saw get more implemented with the Saturn-Pluto opposition of 9/11, that you saw more now with Saturn-Pluto conjoining in Capricorn, where now it's domestic terrorism is the big focus. And now
the CIA, the inception chart of the CIA actually has that Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Leo, I'm pretty sure.
Shocker.
Yeah, I think I want to say it's a Libra rising. It's a super
that's funny.
Chart. Yeah, it's a super interesting chart. And I think also it's like it combusts Saturn too, so that kind of like secrecy thing with it.
Don't quote me on this, because I looked into this just for a moment, because it caught my attention. I was listening to, I think it was Fauci talk in Congress, and he was talking about the history of gain of function research. And I looked at the beginning. I'm pretty sure it started too during that time. And Fauci also has Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Leo too, which I thought was just really that, and it's really prominent in his chart too, which I thought was just kind of like, it's just interesting how things all. Well, this is what so in my client work a lot, and you probably get this too. All of our generation from like the 90s all have all of this stuff in Capricorn, right? Like all like my clients in like the December of 1990, it's like everything in Capricorn, and I kind of been talking about like this Saturn-Pluto stuff was like activating your chart in a way, totally. like your chart shows that this thing that wasn't even your fault, it's not even in your control, was going to influence you and affect you. Like you see that a lot with like with people who are, I guess, associated with big events. You see that big event signature in their chart.
Yeah, like I have so many clients who are in the restaurant industry, and like without fail, they all had like some placement at 22 Capricorn. It's like, it's so funny.
Well, that's what I also think is really funny about our generation, since we all have like Uranus, Neptune, and Capricorn. Some of us have Saturn and Capricorn. There's like that whole, we were the generation the worst affected. Same thing with like the Pluto and Capricorn. When you go over Uranus, like, and this is something I've been talking about too, like the kids that are born with the Saturn, Pluto, and Capricorn, those are going to be you think the Pluto and Scorpio kids are darkened, emo and goth. Like those kids are going to like fucking, I truly think they're going to take every old person's rights away. They deserve it. They deserve their revenge on old people. Because I've been thinking, because I have a little cousin, and I mean, God bless his heart, but just like sometimes I could see the pain of the generation of kids. Like you could just straight up see it's fucking sad. Like you just see how fucked up they are. They, born into 2008. Then they get, the Trump years. And regardless, I think kids shouldn't be like that. Politics just affected kids so much. Then you get Saturn, Pluto. Then they miss a whole year. Now they're antisocial. Now it's to go. I think the Saturn Pluto kids will be important in the next Saturn Pluto opposition.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Gosh, I mean that's so interesting. Just how, I don't know. I think those kids will probably have like, they'll have to think a lot about, and they'll have like really important decisions to make about how to kind of conceptualize the past and like make decisions regarding like what has happened in the past and like the kind of consequences, like kind of like you're saying, like just kill old people. I mean, that would be like the most extreme kind of like.
No, I legit thing. Like Social Security, Medicare, that shit's out the door. Old people are losing it. Them kids lost a lot of shit. They lost a lot of their good years to old people decisions.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I'm thinking about there's this whole trend in like modern monetary theory now where like this idea that like you don't actually have to have a balanced budget. You can just like forever. And like it's like it's a legit kind of like trend in economics right now. And I'm just like,
so this has been my theory, because I've been looking at the Pluto return of America and the Venus return. And here's my reality: is with the people in power, we've been off the gold standard for a long time. We've been playing with fake money for a long time now. And I think with like the Pluto return, where I think there's going to be this, I don't think there's ever going to be a pop. I think we'll go on fake. I don't think well, I guess what I'm trying to say is I look at this Pluto return and somebody like, oh, America, like Janice Yellen actually just kind of warned Congress, like, hey, we might default on our debt. And I was like, oh, like if Janice Yellen's saying something about that, that's kind of a little.
Well, yeah, and just so everybody understands, like, so Pluto has like what, a 270 year cycle.
So what we're talking,
it's in the second house of the United States, so it's a financial thing for us.
Yeah, astrologers have been talking a lot about the Pluto return of the USA's birth chart and how it's going to coincide with. So a lot of people are like, it's the end of the USA. Rome lasted like 2 or 3 Pluto returns, so I don't think that's it, but I think there's some type of reckoning with the financial system because Pluto's, of course, in the second house, and the Venus retrograde at the end of this year is on top of Pluto. There's going to be this whole financial thing that's going to happen. But I also look at that, like the Pluto, and I'm like, we've been playing with fake money for a long time now. We're already in debt so much. The interest rate got reversed. It was like positive. Nothing really makes sense. I can't imagine us actually going that way, or just, I can't imagine the people in power not making something up to keep the system going. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's interesting. The Federal Reserve was like the Pluto opposition. I don't know how close in degree it was, but it was when Pluto was in Cancer. I'm like 99% sure. And so that was like the sort of halfway point of this kind of, how the United States has a financial system and like what it looks like. And it's such an 8th house country too. Just like debt. So it's interesting with like Pluto now opposing that 8th house and that Venus retrograde. Yeah, it does beg the question. I think the Venus station is probably pretty close to exactly opposing a bunch of those 8th house placements too, like the direct station.
Yeah. So what I think the thing that caught my eye the most is so Venus stations on Pluto, but it's not exactly Pluto return yet. The Pluto, when Venus stations direct and then moves forward with Mars, Mars and Venus will conjoin Pluto exactly on the Pluto. So it's all 27. Mind you, at the same time, it's the new moon in Pisces and it's a Mercury-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius. So there's kind of like there's a lot to be said on what's happening this winter, like in the financial system. But, well, I guess I also look at, again, Pluto and things coming to an end. I had a lot of clients who had the Saturn in Capricorn who worked for really big corporations that failed under. Did you see anybody like that? I had a client who she worked for MTV, and it was like Saturn, Pluto. It was in her 5th house too, which I was like, oh, like, way to go. It was like right on her Neptune, and all of that changed, and it's just like, when you see Saturn, Pluto being like, all of this is crumbling away, I look at the Pluto return of like, I don't think we're going to, I can't imagine America being like, yeah, we can't pay our debt. Like, what? You know what I mean? Like, so.
Well, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how like currency plays in with that because of, Uranus still being in Taurus, and how next year, like Saturn is still squaring Uranus for like basically all year. And yeah, I think that the Venus Pluto thing it might be like a financial system thing, but I think the currency story is going to be really relevant, especially since that like the Venus direct station is going to like trine Uranus. So there's just like a lot kind of pinging back and forth there. But yeah, I mean, it's like as astrologers, like what do we do? I don't know. I kind of just like ended up speculating a lot, but
well, that's our job is to I was literally thinking someone made the funniest fucking comment on my YouTube. I literally cried laughing because in my last podcast episode, I was like, who am I to tell you what your purpose is? And someone's like, an astrologer, duh. And it's just like, it's our kind of job to kind of guesstimate what's going to kind of happen. You know what I mean? It is a lot of speculation, but I also kind of look at, like I had a client who was like I told them about it. I was like, I think something bad is going to kind of happen. They're like, oh, thank you for telling me, because I was going to buy in like starting in the fall. I'm like, okay, like maybe that's things like I always try to tell people, I'm like, I'm not sure how it's going to go down, but it's going down. And that's now, I guess my question for you is, you said the Saturn Uranus square. How do you think the Saturn Uranus square is tying into that? Where I guess here's actually a better question. What did you think the Saturn Uranus square was going to be versus what are your thoughts about it now that you're kind of in it?
Well, I mean, it has the kind of like old guard, new guard kind of thing. It has like generational tension and like I think people like this kind of theme of like trusting elders or not. Um, that's totally in play. I mean, I think that's been going on in like so many different communities, not only the astrology community. So I think, yeah, generational tension has been a huge part of it. And I mean, in the world, we see also like the currency stuff with like crypto being like this zone of speculation that is really unpredictable. And I think maybe there's some kind of, I don't know. I have this feeling like it has something to do with becoming accustomed to unpredictability.
Wow, that's a great way to put it.
And just like shit being so weird, like Jake Paul becoming like like YouTube stars doing like and like, so I don't know. There's like people just kind of like throw up their hands sometimes. It's like, well, I guess this is the world we live in now. Like I feel like the entire world is reality TV, and okay, cool. Like I don't know. I don't
well,
get
that's
it.
I think I might have sent this to you on text on the notes for this. It's funny that you brought up Jake Paul. Did I mention that to you?
You did, but I don't know. I was like hanging out with people like recently, and they were like, I can't believe this is like what is happening. Like this is just like weird.
It's crazy. So what caught my attention about this was I was actually, because people know that I'm like a big Tim Dillon fan, and he did they hired him to like speak at a Bitcoin conference, which was really funny. So I wanted to watch what, because he just yells at everybody. So I just wanted to see what he says. Well, Jake Paul's there, and he ends up like interviewing Jake Paul the whole time, which I was like, this is like the weirdest thing. But like, just Jake Paul had so much. I hate the guy's content, but like the dude is fucking smart. Like, and he was talking about what he was talking about with the UFC is how the UFC is almost $1 billion industry, but its main source is Dana White. And that these fighters, in order to get a fight, they have to go through Dana White, and Dana White takes more of their money. And like, you have people that are dying out in the ring, not getting paid. And and Jake Paul, this is what I thought this blew my mind when he said this. He's like, fighters aren't fighters. These are content creators. And I was like, whoa, you got a point when you're monetizing that. And he's like, what I'm trying to do is he's trying to pretty much take Dana White out of power and turn what boxers are starting to turn into YouTubers, because they're starting to understand that they're content creators. And that to me is like, whoa, now you're fucking with the slippery slope there where
Everything's content.
Everything is content. No one's a celebrity anymore. Well, this is why I sent you that article, which for everyone who's listening, I'm going to link this article in the description because it was a really good article. I don't know who wrote it. It's called The Blurred Lines of Parasocial Relationships by, Fedeki. I can't say their name. Great article. I'm going to link it. It's and I sent it to you, Drew. It was really interesting, and I sent it to Drew because I wanted to talk about this, about the idea of Capricorn and Aquarius. And what this article talks about is how TV used to be game shows and gimmicks, and it was really scripted versus, they said it was like, I think it was The Real World and MTV Cribs, and everything kind of took its turn. And this is when Neptune was in Aquarius, which I thought was really interesting, is when this theme started playing out more, where the TV shows that were based off of like a setup didn't work, and it was just like, just give them a fucking camera, and just like reality TV kind of taking over.
Like,
and now
like Jackass.
yeah, it's like literally reality TV takes over, and they talk about reality TV in the form of the parasocial relationship. And when you watch reality TV, you gain more of a connection with that person you're watching. Mm-hmm. And they talked about how that is now how that is translated to social media. And I mean, like I deal with this all the time, because when you're on, YouTube, when you're vulnerable, when you talk to people, you develop that parasocial relationship. And they just talk about how that is now really the main influence that you see in media, is this, how it's not about, can you make the funniest show? Can you make, successes? How connected are you to your audience, and how strong is that parasocial relationship?
I think one of the key points that they're making in that article is that it's not a two-way street. Like that, mm-hmm. that connection is very one-sided, and it's not expected for it to be two-sided. Like people like creators aren't expected to like actually care about their fans. You know what I mean? Of course, everybody like.
I care about my fans.
I know you do. I just realized I'm like, oh shit.
He's like, Cameron actually doesn't give a shit about any of you guys.
Well, I mean, but your fans like will see you for readings, and so I feel like, you know, that's like
Well, it's different when you're an astrologer, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think astrologers are actually kind of like a weird subcategory of that, where
we're just different.
We're just built different. Like, because you could actually like spend an hour with us, and like and
we actually talk about your fucking life, and we develop a relationship, and there's like trust.
exactly. And like I think that's actually really cool, because it is like a two-way thing. So maybe to go back to what you were saying earlier about like astrologers like being sort of trendy in a way, or like there's a kind of like being at the cutting edge of something, like that kind of like two-way relationship with like having a following or having like people who feel close to you. Like with astrologers, there actually is like some kind of intimacy that can happen. And so I wonder if there's some kind of trend setting there, maybe, if to the extent that astrologers actually do set trends. I don't know if that's actually true, but it'd be interesting to see if like what happens with that.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily think it's like, I think we have, I look at Twitter. Have you noticed the Twitter algorithm lately? Like, I look at the trending page and I see astrology, like it is huge now. Like there's like parts of the astrology world on Twitter that like, I didn't even know that they existed. And I've been here since like day one. Mm-hmm. And it's just huge how it's gotten on Twitter now. And I just hear everybody, I don't know if it is just me and it's because I'm immersed in the astrology world and so I'm biased about it, but like I just see so many more people having it in their radar. A client of mine said something about, because I every reading I have, I ask two questions. One is how familiar are you with your chart, and the second is how did you originally get into astrology, and how does that lead you here to beginning reading with me today? Mm-hmm. And she said astrology has a social value right now that makes it worth learning. And I went, wow, what a great way to put that into words. I feel like right now too, with this Aquarius too, where you're starting to see people like really, like, I mean, having to learn about the right things and know the right things to be accepted into groups of people. And I'm starting to see astrology be one of those next stepping stones. And I just thought that was really interesting for someone to get into astrology, just for like, you know, I'm sure that's not one of the only reasons, but what a great way to put it too. Cause I think I have buddies of mine now, like 5 years ago, my dude friends used to make fun of me for being in astrology. Now they're like, hey, you know, what's going on? You know what I mean? Yeah. And it's so, I guess, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it's funny. I talked to my brother and my dad, who are both very like, I don't know, for lack of a better word, they're like normies or muggles or whatever. And like something about COVID and like what I was saying about 2020 before it happened to them. And then it actually like big, terrible shit actually did happen. They started taking me more seriously. And so now, you know, we'll be talking about whatever, and then I'll just bring up, you know, some kind of astrological thing, and they'll like actually sound like they're listening to me as like a valid source of knowledge. And I'm just like, this is bizarro world right now. Like my Aquarius rising dad with Saturn and Mars conjunct the ascendant is like actually listening to me talk about astrology instead of like, you know, the Wall Street Journal. I don't know. So what were you asking?
I just want to know what your thoughts were on that. Well, because I mean, like, it's super funny. My mom, she doesn't tell me a lot of things about herself. I don't know why, but she told me this one time. This is the reason why she doesn't believe in the devil stuff. She's super, super Christian, but she goes, this is why she doesn't. But by the way, this is why she doesn't believe in this stuff. Her and her stepsister, when they were like 14, played with a Ouija board and it worked. Scared the shit out of her. And this is why she doesn't believe in it. I'm like, oh, it works, so you don't believe in it? Okay. Well, anyway, so
I choose for this not to exist because I know it exists.
That's a lot of my mom, but that's okay. She's a Sagittarius. She's like, I'm okay with just not knowing. Which, bless her heart, that's good for her. But I said, So me and my mom, I've told you about this. We have really similar charts, and I said a few things to her because I was like, "Mom, we have the same charts. Both of our dads died in the same year. We both had like the same relationship with our older siblings. Like we've had so many similarities." And and we both what I hit her with was one of the big things that happened to my mom was when she was in high school. One of her best friends got murdered in high school, and it was a really big deal to her. And one of my best friends got murdered in high school, and I brought that, and she kind of just like looked at me, and she's like, "Huh." Like, that is a little weird, isn't it? And I was like, it fucking is, huh? And so, like, when I say this out of blue, like, it's so funny because you can hear it, like, when I say it to my mom, you could see her resist the information. But, like, and that's the thing, what I've really seen with people who were originally skeptics. And it was the Saturn Pluto, too, because I have like, my roommate, and I've talked about him on my show before, of how we always argue about astrology. He doesn't, like, when I bring up that I was right about the Saturn Pluto thing, he doesn't like to admit it, but it's like you could just see people wanting to be more open, but still having that resistance. But it's interesting seeing people's reception to astrology right now. And that's why I said that we're kind of like this trendsetter. We're in this weird market where the people who are listening to us, because the people who are listening to us are usually like looking for answers or looking for guidance somewhere. Like people, like there are people who are just casually just being like, I don't know, I'm just bored watching shit on YouTube. Right. But I like a lot of the clients I see are people like trying to make big changes in their life, trying to unlock their full potential and really like live their destiny, right? So you have people who are activators in the world listening to this and, you know, taking with it.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen a couple more people like that lately too. And it is interesting. Like, yeah, I mean, you and I have talked before about the sort of like astrology, it becoming normal to consult astrologers about like big decisions, like not only in one's personal life, but also like companies and that sort of frontier of astrology, maybe. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of how that shifts. And maybe there is something about like the Saturn Uranus square of like this kind of introduction and normalization of like weird stuff into sort of like the way that the Saturnian stuff works.
What did you just say? You said getting used to unpredictability
or
weird is the norm. I was like, that's fucking funny. Like or weird, what I wanted to say to that was weird is the tradition now. Like Saturn being like, you know, like it's time to embrace weird as the new normal. Different as the new normal.
Yeah, and like there's this like kind of, it feels not optional in this weird way, like kind of embracing the sort of like the way that Elon Musk can just change everything with a tweet, you know, like that kind of shit is just so antithetical to the way that we've thought of power before. So I don't know, or maybe for some people it's not, but it seems like there's this kind of like throw your hands up in the air and just like, well, this is the world we live in right now, and I guess I've got to like embrace the weird, like embrace how weird it is. Otherwise, like I have like there's no choice, the lack of option with it.
That you know, it's super funny. You probably relate to this too, and I've told you this before. It's like with Saturn being on my sun, on being in Leo, I felt like I've had to be more Leo now than ever in my life. Like it's been like, you know, like this is the world that we live in. It's going to stay weird and be this way for probably forever, as long as our lives are here. You can like, I've been looking at the Jupiter Neptune conjunction and I'm like, what crazy VR sex porn thing is going to come out well, like, you know how I watched this documentary on the internet, and the internet was primarily used to share porn. That's why it was first started. So I think this idea of like things starting like sex sells, you know what I mean? Like there's this initiative. I look at the Jupiter Neptune, like what fucked up thing is going to get introduced to where we're like fully immersed in because I also think the Neptune and Aries ingress is going to be like the Black Mirror episode where you can like live in the past and like go like, you know, like fuck your dead like fuck buddy. That sounds great. I would totally do that. I would check out for that. But
it's Saturn and Aries in the fifth.
Yeah, right. I'm like, see ya, I'm gonna go live in the cloud.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the VR stuff is gonna get more legit when Saturn goes through it. So I wouldn't be surprised if there are like ventures begin on the Jupiter Neptune conjunction that have to do with like VR stuff, but it will become more kind of commonplace when Saturn is in Pisces. And that's like what I usually see with the way that Saturn works in like a mundane context, or like when we're talking about like cultural changes and changes in society, is that Saturn doesn't Saturn doesn't like bring something, like just like make it happen. It'll like make it normal. Like it'll like raise it to this level where it's like everybody's doing it. Like I think about
that's
I
so
think
Aquarius normalizing it.
Yeah,
That's
well,
so
and that whole trend of like normalize X, like,
normalize that. Well, that's
yeah.
that's super funny. Well, that everyone's doing it. That is literally probably the best way I've heard, because like something I always relate to Saturn Aquarius, just being like Leo is like, dude, a lot of Saturn Aquarius is just straight up peer pressure. Like a lot of the shit people like subscribe to nowadays and like want other people to subscribe to is just straight up like, do this, and it's just like,
well, yeah, and us with our Uranus and Aquarius, like in early Aquarius, we're like opposite our sect light. We're like, I don't know, but yeah, like just as an example of like the Saturn, like how Saturn works that way. I think I told you about what I was looking into in terms of like pop music and like what pop music with Saturn and Sag was like, and how like, you know, EDM is, you know, like became a genre and like a thing when Pluto went into Capricorn, interestingly.
Yeah, that's I was having this conversation with a client today, but
oh really?
Yeah, well, I truly think we're in 80 years they're going to look back at the past 10 years of Pluto and Capricorn, Saturn, Capricorn, and the music industry, all corporate. No, like I mean, you could hear the sadness in every song that has been produced in the past 10 years of Pluto and Capricorn. It's all been what's been chart. Like, well, you also look at how Spotify algorithms work, and you look at how artists have to make money. It's not necessarily about the artist expression anymore, but it's about what is the algorithm going to like. Music's turning into content, just like everything else.
Oh yeah,
right? And
well, that's super interesting. Yeah, so I was just thinking about like the sort of EDM influences in pop music and how that became like normal, that became everywhere, like EDM in pop music. You know, we have like Lady Gaga, and everybody was like,
country has trap beats now.
Yeah, exactly. Like but that was happening when Pluto went into Capricorn, but then when Saturn went into Sag was actually when like the pop drop became like this like obligatory period, like obligatory section in any pop song, where it's like they would take do you know what I mean? Where it's like,
as a producer, I do know exactly what you mean.
Like that dance moment, like right after the chorus, and then there's like one more chorus after this, like this EDM section of the song. And so Saturn and Sagittarius, I think, just like made that like super common.
Well, it was, yeah, that's a good way, because it was, I mean, that's been a thing for a while, but you definitely heard it in all radio music before that. Well, it's the same thing, like Saturn and Scorpio, like every song was so like, what's that Sia song? Like, I've got thick skin and an elastic heart. Like, it's like all this like super deep and like intense, like raw emotion. And then also like you had, I think that was like when Miley Cyrus went and did her like
Wrecking Ball with Saturn and Scorpio.
Yeah. And it was very like, like I'm gonna shake my ass and let's say pussy and weed on music now. And that's
but like the Robin Thicke Miley Cyrus thing. I think
yes,
that was also Saturn and Scorpio.
Super Saturn and Scorpio.
Well, and she has a stellium in late Scorpio also.
Good for her. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I was thinking when you said Saturn and Sag, I was thinking about Nikki. Because every time I hear Sag, I just think about
oh yeah. Well, I think
but she's been around.
Anaconda was definitely like,
oh, Anaconda. Well, I think so. One of my favorite Saturn return stories is Drake, and this is actually I want to do a video about this. Drake's midheaven is on Algol, and when do you want to remember?
Is he Regulus rising then?
He's Regulus rising. Midheaven's on Algol, and do you remember how he got famous? So Drake's always been famous, number one, but you got to remember. So he was with Young Money. And the way that he's dropped his signing with Young Money was by releasing, if you're reading this, it's too late, on like on some other recordings, on some other studio, right? That dropped, and that was the biggest thing. And that's when Meek Mill was dating Nicki, and Meek Mill said some shit. You remember Back to Back? A revenge song that literally changed Drake's trajectory forever. It changed Meek Mill's trajectory forever. Was Back to Back, and it was a revenge song, and his midheaven's on fucking Algol. And I think about that so much of like, and that was during his Saturn return, which he has Saturn in Scorpio.
Okay.
That was him getting off of Young Money and then doing his own thing, which you see after that diss track. That was when, I mean, Drake went bam. I mean, he's the biggest artist, and I think he's way bigger than Michael Jackson, in my opinion. He will go down for a long time.
I think some people might have some problems with you saying.
Well, something I've been really thinking about lately is 80s music and how
Pluto and Scorpio, like 100%.
Well, it's how people, like, I see kids nowadays, because like 2000 was a long time ago for them. So like 80s, like they have so many more years to work. Like they're not gonna know. Mike, who the fuck is Michael Jackson? Does he have a Twitter or an Instagram? No. Drake does though. So I think, well, it's the same thing. There was probably huge celebrities in the before the printing press, but we'll never fucking know who the fuck they are because they weren't born during the era of the printing press.
No, I mean, I think celebrity is like I don't know when that started, but it was definitely like after the
Elvis Presley, Saturn
yeah,
and Pluto and Leo. That's when. That's
yeah.
why I think the Pluto-Saturn opposition is the death of the celebrity, because everyone's a celebrity now with Saturn and Leo and Pluto and Aquarius.
Yeah.
Because I think it was there was someone who was like quote unquote the first celebrity, and I think one of them that they used was Elvis, because Elvis was like one of the first really glamorized, sexualized people that, and also he was like the foundation for being a celebrity, drugged up, fucking everybody, super bad behind doors, and then like overdose. The trajectory of every celebrity after that.
Right.
How did we get to music? Sorry, that was just.
Because I
brought up a lot of great points.
Saturn, I brought it up because of like the Saturn and Sag thing and like predictions about just like things like how Saturn sort of like normalizes things that were previously sort of like just, you know, here and there. And it makes them like super common. And so
kind of like the lockdowns right now, Saturn Aquarius, everyone's like, yeah, more lockdowns, fuck it. And they're like, fuck it, more, why not normalize it?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. It's definitely like right now, like as we're talking, that Mars Jupiter opposition is definitely getting closer. So.
It's getting, I just did my weekly horoscope, and it's literally like Jupiter goes back, Mars hits it, where I think you're just gonna see like the masks come back and everyone go no, and then Mars goes into Virgo and everyone turns into a hypochondriac overnight.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm excited for Virgo, like Mercury and Venus and Mars and Virgo. It's gonna be funny just seeing how hypochondriac everyone gets, because it's gonna be pretty lit.
Yeah, or like remember when COVID was becoming like a big deal in the United States, Mercury had that retrograde between Pisces and Aquarius, and
oh my god, I watched
just like wait, how do I wash my hands? Like how often do I have to wash my hands? Like,
I watched the White House press briefing every day during that Mercury retrograde, and they were like, we don't know what's everyone's like, I remember I went and bought N95s back in February because I was like looking at the papers, I was like seeing it all converge together. I was like, this isn't gonna be good. But yeah, that Mercury, I think I look also back at that Mercury retrograde Pisces. That was the big reason why we didn't do anything for a long time too. There was just this it was just a Mercury retrograde Pisces. Everyone's just like,
yeah, like I don't know what we can even do.
Just wash your hands. Mask's good, mask bad. It's fine. It's not fine. This is happening.
Yeah, I mean, I was working at Tesla at the time, and it was like in a retail location, and it was so stressful. Like just going to work every day was so stressful because nobody was wearing masks at that point either, and that wasn't even like a thought. And yeah, it just sucked. I remember one day I brought in like a diffuser and like essential oils and stuff just to lighten the mood. I'm such a West Coast mom sometimes.
Yeah, I was like, your white, your conspiracy mom is coming out.
I can't escape it. You know, that moon.
It's pretty good. Essential. Oh yeah, that's your moon in Leo.
Well, it's like my moon, just like moon. Yeah, totally. There's a lot going on there.
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of concerned about Saturn going into Pisces, not for the drops that there's going to be. Well, also I think Saturn Pisces is going to be some fun music, but I think I look at astrology. I really think the astrology conversation is going to get brought up when Saturn goes into Pisces, because people are going to be like, okay, so what do we believe again? So like, what's going on there? I think Saturn and Sagittarius, you saw a big wave of, I was a part of the spiritual wave of the Saturn and Sagittarius, where you saw like that got normalized, was crystals, chakras, fucking everyone getting tattoos of dream weavers and shit like that, dream catchers. I mean, and so I think Saturn Pisces is going to bring that back, but I kind of wonder where astrology kind of fits in the map with that. Because, well, this is also, I keep bringing this up because if COVID got shut, like let's say we solved COVID tomorrow and everything went back to normal, people are going to try to find something to attack again. And I think astrology is on the list of things people can just get ready to attack at any time that are like more and more trending. I guess my question for you is, well, and this is something I've been thinking, like the way I like to analogize Saturn and Pisces a lot is, sure, we can have all these rules and we can have all of these, structures and how to do things. But when it comes down to it, Saturn and Pisces is you have to be interchangeable. I think of Saturn and Pisces like a cell membrane where it's a structure, but it's a liquid one. And its whole job is to decipher what comes in and what goes out. You know what I mean? And so I kind of look at Saturn and Pisces as, well, one thing I think when we get to Saturn and Pisces is like, we saw the Jupiter and Pisces, the goo hit. Like we were like, like there was this hit, right? I think when Saturn goes into Pisces, I think we're going to realize we're all being a little hard on each other. And we're like, the rules don't have to be that serious, guys. We can be, but I also,
and like the whole boundaries thing too, like everybody talks about boundaries and it's been like such a, like since Saturn and Capricorn, it's just, it's anytime I hear a word being used so much, I'm like, okay, what do we mean here? Like, and because everybody kind of has their own definition of it, but I don't like, I think when Saturn goes into Pisces, that kind of, there's going to be more recognition around like the permeability that you're talking about being non-optional. Like you actually can't make a boundary that hard and fast. Like things will affect you regardless of like all the walls that you put up. You know what I mean?
Why'd you say non-optional? Is that a Saturn thing? You said that earlier too about normalizing things.
Yeah, I don't know why that's like.
I like that though, in the sense of like it's, well,
it's
Saturn. It's non-negotiable.
Yeah, I think it is a Saturn thing. Like,
well, because
go ahead.
Well, I've looked at in this personal development / cult I was in. There was this like.
Careful, Cam. I might have to call you out.
I'll open that box one day. They had this what was the word I was just using? Non-negotiable. They use these terms non-negotiable. They have this like, well, so like for example, I played this. They gave me this game. It's called PLD. It's a game I played. And PLD, some people might know this. For the people that know this, Sci Seminars. It's like a personal development group thing. It's good. It's really controversial. It's good. It's bad. You get what you get from it. Anyway, they had this 90-day long one that I did where in the 90 days, you like make 3 goals, like a personal one, a professional one, and a fun one, and you do it. And you do it with a team of people. And you have to hold this team of people like accountable to your goals. You pretty much go through a whole life change of 90 days with a group of 25 strangers. And it's pretty much one of those fucked up yet probably the funnest thing I've ever did. But anyway, they have this, they kind of make you choose into playing. They're like, don't just waste your time. Like you're either here and they describe life in 3 ways. You either play to lose, play to not win, or you play to win. And they also bring this along in accordance with, there are terms that you play the game with, and there are things that are negotiable, and then there are things that are non-negotiable. And I really just, when you said talking about these Saturn things being non-negotiable, I thought a lot about Saturn being things like commitments and responsibilities, and that there is a side of things that's like, and this is the way I've also, like a lot of my Scorpio, I've had a lot of clients with like, Moon and Scorpio, and they got like Uranus opposite and like Saturn. I'm like, I know you're ready. Like you're just ready to go up at any moment. But like, it's like, well, it's kind of like when early on in the pandemic, well, I mean, even now it's like this, like, well, I think it was much bigger early on in the pandemic when you would have people kind of losing their minds in the grocery store. You have the mask on, everyone's like just freaking the fuck out. And then like, someone will just like yell and pop off. Like I remember being in the grocery store, just like, you could just feel no one wants to be fucked with, essentially.
Yeah.
I've been really looking at Saturn and Aquarius being like, well, you may hate this, but it's non-negotiable. You like, just like in the DMV fucking sucks, but you have to do what you got to do. You know what I mean? There's no way around it. You got to get your license. If you want to drive, you got to get your license. You got to get, and you're going to have to go through the line, and you're going to have to do all this stupid shit. Just like, you live in America. There's mask rules. You're going to have to deal with it. Everyone's stressed out. You're not special. Like something I really hate is like people that just like the Karens in the world that are like, oh, what about me and my life? And it's like, dude, this is like it's not like I like that term non-negotiable. It's like this isn't something that you could just argue your way out of. Like just fucking accept it. Like just Saturn seems so much like I don't know. That's made me. You're making my brain think about
like
stuff.
But I think maybe then the Saturn and Pisces moment is like, can we just chill? Like
Well, I think Saturn.
I have Saturn and Pisces, and when shit gets really like Karen-y, I don't know, can we say that?
Karen-y?
You said Karen, and I'm just
like, Karen-y, okay.
Yeah. Like, oh wait, I just went away. What happened?
Oh, I think there we go.
Yeah. I think Saturn and Pisces, it's like, it is that kind of like, we're all connected, and that's not a choice. Like, we just are. Like, we are all connected. And if you're kind of coming into my space with your like bullshit,
bad vibes,
with like your bad vibes,
that was a Saturn and Sag thing, vibes.
I kind of have to deal with that in a way. It's like, and at the end of the day, maybe there's some kind of like purification that can come through that encounter, like instead of running away and saying like you don't exist, which is like a very Saturnian reaction, like a more Jupiterian reaction.
You don't exist. Yes. Yeah. Very Saturnian reaction.
Yeah. A more Jupiterian reaction, or like Saturn doing things in a Jupiter way, is like, well, we have to come through on the other side of this together. Like there's that mutability of it where it's
that gay corny end of the movie. We should all get, like, Pisces is the kumbaya in my opinion. Like Aquarius is like, they're not welcome, and Pisces is like, but we should all be friends. Yeah. And I also think Saturn and Pisces is still going to be like, we can't act tough all day long. You know what I mean? I feel like Saturn and Pisces is going to be like, okay, let's loosen things up a little bit. How do we integrate things? Because that's one of Jupiter's main significations, right? Integration. How do we bring things together? But it's interesting watching Saturn and Aquarius right now, knowing that that's going to happen, right? Like something I talk a lot about on this podcast that I just been trying to think of is thinking of things in hindsight. Like, what is the Saturn Aquarius going to mean when Saturn's in Pisces? Just like Saturn and Capricorn. I mean, Saturn and Capricorn it still feels like Saturn's in Capricorn in a weird way, because just Saturn's at home, right? And something I want to almost kind of go back to, because this is something I watched. I watched a fish documentary last night about like a swordfish.
Speaking of Pisces.
Oh
wait, I thought you meant fish like PHISH. I'm like, okay, Cam.
No, actual fish, swordfish. And well, this brought up the Aquarius thing. Is they talked about how swordfish will follow, like, well, it also talked about sharks, and the analogy I kind of wanted to make was this whole Aquarius thing being like the group dynamic, and how have you ever seen a school of fish? And how
I have never seen a school of fish in real life. No.
What are you doing there? I'm just kidding. Okay, so a school of fish. Imagine a school of fish, right? They're all together, and there's this hive mind. But like I was watching, like, how the fuck do fish all tune into the same radio wave and just go like that? They don't. That's the thing, though. They're like, well, as long as it's the same thing as birds, I do know things about. It's not the same thing as birds.
Oh, okay.
Birds. Birds go. Well, it's the same thing as like wolves and shit like that. Fish don't. Fish. It's like it's literally like a hive brain. It's like this. But what's interesting though is if one of those fish escapes, they're powerless. Versus now you have a swordfish. It's like this sword is more powerful as an individual versus this fish is more powerful with the collective and the group. And I just thought so much about Saturn and Aquarius and all this Leo stuff that we're going to have. Is like, it's such a difference where, well, it's the same thing. It's like where the collective works and where the collective doesn't work. There's also the same thing of like, where the collective doesn't work is like when you're, maybe, I don't know. There's a lot of ways, but I just thinking of this fish analogy. It's so interesting how, and also too, that these fish in this group, they didn't all scatter. Like when you see like animals like buffalo, or like, I just watched this other thing with like cheetah and hogs, and how like they all scatter. So then they can just pinpoint whatever the fuck that they're going to get, like a gazelle, right? But the fish don't do that. So like the swordfish the whole time, like they'll dive in and the fish just move around. And I'm like, that's fucking, for one, that's crazy. And the fact that we also kind of like come from fish and we don't have that. Like, I wonder where that little part of our intuition is still around in our DNA. You know what I mean? Well, you know what I mean? That's a defense mechanism that we kind of had before we ever got up here on the mainland. But I look at that in the Aquarius light of like Saturn Aquarius of like, where defining the difference of where that group dynamic is strong, like the fish, like, because you can kind of get away with a lot of shit, or where it's like weak, like, you know, like a gazelle. I don't know.
Well, I mean, so with birds, the way it was, I did this, like, I researched this a little bit for a talk that I gave on electional astrology, and just thinking about, like, you know, the way that birds were used in like Roman augury, like they would make predictions based on like what birds do when they move.
That's how Rome started.
What?
That's how Rome was founded. It was actually by birds. Did you know that?
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Rome and Romulus argued over how many birds they saw fly over each other.
Oh, right. Well, yeah. So there's that whole thing, but you know, the way there's like these things called murmurations of birds, where it's like, you know, when there's like a ton of birds together and they're kind of like doing this like weird like swirling kind of thing where it's like some kind of, it's like you're watching like the screensaver thing. It's like morphing in different shapes, and so if, unlike the fish thing that you're talking about where there's like this hive mind, for birds it's actually like they're paying attention to like the birds, and each bird is paying attention to the bird in its immediate surroundings, and that's it. But like as a result of that, like every one of those birds is paying attention to the birds in its immediate surroundings, and as a result we see this like kind of collective like shape making, and so I think that's like an interesting metaphor too for the way that you know, groups function, is like we're never seeing the whole picture from our individual vantage point, but we're responding instead to like the few people who we know, and then when you add that up, then you get this kind of like,
that's a great way to put it, of like literally the people, like that third house relationship of like the people that are closest to you that influence you the most. Like I've been talking much more about that in my readings of like the third house being like people close to you, how much of an influence that actually plays on you, right? And that's a great way of looking at like the birds in your immediate view, which doesn't, and they're getting it from up the food chain, or up
and like the third night, I was thinking about this the other day with like the third ninth house, and how like the people, your locale and like the people who you're around is like intimately tied to what you think about things, like your ninth house, like beliefs and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, well it's I look at it as the same thing with the 5th house 11th house dynamic of like the 5th house is like what you recreation, the 11th house is who you do it with, right? The 9th house, like the people you hang out with are going to shape, like are going to, you know, match your beliefs, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it too. Sorry, you got me thinking there.
Yeah, I mean, it's cool. We can take a Saturn in Pisces.
Well, I think dude, I
know Saturn. You with Saturn and Aries over there.
Dude, I'm so literally, I don't know what it's been. I think it's been like since like this Mars Venus conjunction in Leo, but like my fire energy is coming back. Like it's super funny. I'm in the middle of 8 projects right now, and I have never felt more like, usually like when I have like 1 or 2 projects, I'm always like, I got like 8 things going on, and I feel alive. Like I'm like,
yeah, I'm the same way. Like when I'm busy, I'm better.
I got that. Well, it's that Mars and Gemini of like just. It's, I don't know. So something I was thinking a little bit about, for one, we got to bring triplicity back.
What do you mean?
Well, I just read
like in the dignity scheme.
Yeah. Well, because I question when did.
So when you say triplicity is element.
So for people who aren't aware, there's also a dignity scheme, right? There's domicile, then there's exaltation. And then there's like terms and bounds. Well, then there's also triplicity. And every fucking author from time and time again, triplicity is like the first thing they mention. And like and no one talks about it at all anymore. I feel like I see people on Twitter mention it every now and then. And triplicity is basically whatever elemental triplicity a planet is
Fire,
in. Fire, earth, air, water. Each one of those, you know, there's a planet that rules a triplicity set. Now, Saturn in Aries, Saturn has triplicity in a day chart in a fire sign. So, well, this is my argument with like something like Saturn and fall. Like, what's the same thing with Mars and Cancer? Well, it has triplicity, and it has triplicity over the whole water signs. So when you talk about the malefics in fall, they still have they both have triplicity in their signs of fall, which is like really interesting to me of like, why is that there and how bad is it?
I'm trying to think if that's the case for like, for what planets is that not the case? Like, that's not the case for Mercury.
Well, for just for the malefics though, for Mars and Saturn.
Well, I mean, Venus has triplicity in Earth.
Yeah, but that's Jupiter common with Mercury though, right?
Jupiter has triplicity in air. But I mean, that's not like, oh wait, it's not in fall.
Jupiter's triplicity in
okay, so Jupiter does not
fire
for that. Yeah.
Well, it also depends on the fucking setting too, but
yeah, I mean, triplicity is important. Like, if you see a like Venus in Scorpio, for example, like, or the Moon in Capricorn, like there's, or Venus in Virgo, like these placements are all like sneakily competent. You know, like there's something about them that actually works really well a lot of times, or maybe even Mars and Taurus sometimes.
I see. Well, I tell this to my Mars and Libra clients. It's so many times, especially if they're in the night chart, I'm like, your ability to not make a decision is one of your greatest gifts. Like, your ability to not act and not confront things truly is helping you out in a lot of situations.
Your executive dysfunction is the most functional thing about you.
Well, it's like I've seen, well, it's like, for example, every time I see a Mars and Libra person try to fight someone, like start a fight, it's just like, just stop.
My brother has Mars in Libra, and it is conjunct this, or it's co-present with the South Node, so that throws in a little bit of a like wrench with it. But I see Mars in Libra as like just, you know, struggling to ask for what they want in a way, or like they have an idea of how it should go because like that's what's going to make everybody happy, but then they actually have to ask everybody if that's going to make them happy, and that part is like really awkward.
Yeah.
Like my brother has Mars in Libra and Venus in Scorpio. And he'll be like, so where does everybody want to go to lunch? And he has an idea about it already. And he's like, well, how about here? And we're like,
that's why they asked. That's how my sister's got the Libra Scorpio stuff. And she's the same way. She's like, when she asks a question, you don't, it's not about that question. It's for other reasons. And you're like, why is that actually there? I'm like, why are you actually asking that question? Just tell me like what the actual question is.
Right.
No, well, like what I've seen with Mars and Libra too, is like when they try to do, well, I always like to look at Mars and Libra as like a criminal in a courtroom. Like, looking like the criminal doesn't help. Like, dress nice, be docile, don't react to things, look dead in the eyes.
Are you thinking like Mars and Libra or Venus and Scorpio here?
Mars and Libra. Well, also, you know, it's so funny. So many charts you see that have Mars and Libra have Venus and Scorpio. Like, they're always, why are they always right next to each other at the same time?
It's really weird.
It is, isn't it really weird? Like, almost like, you don't ever see like someone with like random, like I never see like I know Cancer's the Mars and Libra. I know everybody with every placement, but like you just see the Scorpio, like the mutual reception right there, all the same. Same thing with Venus and Aries and Mars and Taurus. I do see that commonly. And some
of us have Venus and Taurus and Mars and Aries, and you know,
some people just have all these exalted and domicile planets, huh?
I joke about that because like I have the opposite placements of my brother, like so he has the detriment ones and I have the domicile ones.
Are you the favorite kid?
You're
You're the favorite kid.
He definitely, they're like being outcast is definitely like way more a part of his experience than it is in mine.
Someone say.
But he's also an Aquarius Moon, so you know.
Oh, so that's on him. Yeah. He's like, I'm different. Yeah. I've had my Jupiter Saturn square. I'm definitely the black sheep of my whole family. Like, no one confront, like, I'm just like, I'll be like in the middle of a conversation, just bringing up astrology, and then just like people just like let it go in one ear and another, and then just move on to whatever else.
Well, yeah, it's funny with like Jupiter like ruling your fourth too. It's like, I don't know. Yeah, there's.
So one of the things that has fucked me up recently about Jupiter ruling my fourth is I looked at my astrolocality for like one of the first times, because I was always like, what the fuck's the difference? Because I've seen people move their astrolocality to a different city, and I just don't get that. But I was looking at my astrolocality. My fourth house ruler, which has definitely represented my dad much more than like my mom. My mom's much more my 10th house ruler.
That's how I do it too.
Yeah, same here. My Jupiter line goes over, I mean, literally over my bedroom at my dad's house where I grew up. Like, I'm not even kidding you. And I mean, this is like, I was born about 30 minutes away from where I grew up. So, and my Jupiter line literally goes right over where I grew up at my dad's house. And I was like that. And I lived in a very, like, that's kind of like, okay. Like, cause I lived up in the hills and away from society. And I was like, that's a little weird. Same thing when, it was weird too.
Capricorn dad.
Yeah. Right. Well, last year, the gender reveal fire that happened in Southern California, that started on the street I grew up on. And that was the day that Mars conjoined my IC. Was that fire?
Wow.
I know. I was like, that's so funny. Like, see, and for the people listening, this is why it's so important to like, just be paying attention to how shit manifests. Cause I remember when Mars hit my IC, I thought I was going to get like robbed. I thought I was going to like get in a fight with my neighbor. Cause I fucking hated where I lived at the time. And it was like really hot too. But no, it was just like my childhood street got burned down to the ground. That makes sense. That checks out with Mars on IC, right?
Yeah. I mean, but then there's other times that I guess this is like kind of what you're saying, where it's like, that makes sense, but it's like, it wasn't what you expected. And like, I think it's so important to kind of like have that mindset and mentality when doing astrology for yourself or doing it for your friends or something, where it's like, yeah, we know things about the future, but we know them like very loosely, and just like kind of having like, I always look at it as like I'm always trying to learn something from my transits. And that kind of makes it more fun to me.
Yeah. Well, what I like to say is like, we know the context and we know the players. Right. We're not really sure how the moves are going to be. But brings me up to, because you made a tweet about how you were like, oh, like, I'm always pleasantly like, what the Mars Venus conjunction was not that good, and you're like, that was surprised. That was cool. It really wasn't. That really wasn't all that great.
I went to a poker night. I have poker nights like pretty frequently at one of my friends' houses, and
he's a gambler. Sinner.
As soon as like Jupiter went in my 5th house, I was like, all right, let's gamble. But yeah, so it was just like really like tense and awkward, which, honestly, in a sort of like traditional delineation of that conjunction makes sense. Like, Mars is maltreating Venus, like social stuff is going to feel really tense and like conflicting. But you have like the more kind of like, I guess it's not necessarily a more modern delineation, but the way that it was being talked about was like passion and like hot and like fun. And
that's how I talked about it. I was like, I told everyone, go fuck someone, like straight up, go do it.
Yeah, but I think it would have been like more goth than you realize. It was like kind of like sort of like dark and like vulnerable in like an uncomfy way.
Some people are into that.
I'm not saying don't do it. Yeah.
There was this chart I was looking at. Well, like there was this like chart I was looking at that I was like, oh, this might be bad for relationships, but the way it was like set up without going into the details was like, you might like this. I don't know. It's kind of like where, intense, like it's like when you got like someone who's got like Mars ruling their 7th house and it's like in Scorpio, and it's like okay, like I'm not gonna look for the foo light shit for the relationship stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, here's another question for you. Is this because this is where my mind's at currently, is looking at this Mars Venus conjunction in Leo. What do you think Mars and Venus are going to be like for that month in Capricorn? Going on Pluto.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. Also, I'm like, I'm doing research for a talisman with that, and like thinking about just like how Saturnian is that going to be? Like how kind of like the Leo thing is ostensibly like apparently more kind of outgoing, it's in a fire sign, and so you would have expected more kind of like fireworks, for lack of a better word. And then the Capricorn one, I think it's like there's just a more kind of like, it feels important, like there's this kind of gravity to it. Like I think that's going to be, I think any kind of relationship stuff that happens around that time for people is going to have this weight to it, as opposed to like if you were, having sex under the Mars Venus conjunction in Leo, it would have been more like, like this is fun maybe, but the kind of durability of it maybe not so much.
Oh yeah, no, that's not that was just little. What that reminded me of is like a sparkler that was like supposed to go off and it was a dud, or like maybe it only went off halfway. You're like, okay,
it's like you light the firework and then it gets to the end and it just kind of like blows up on the ground and everybody's like running.
Yeah, it was especially with like Mars going into Jupiter. Well, I've been looking at. Well, it's funny you said like everything's gonna feel more serious, because I remember. Have you ever like maybe like took something really seriously at one time, and then like you look back, you're like that wasn't even like for real, like that wasn't even that serious, like
like relationship stuff?
Well, not only relationships, like I remember I had this person, like there's been a lot of people that I've almost collaborated with, like I had this like business partner for a while, and there was this like I remember when I first met her and we were like working together, it felt like I was like, I mean, really young too, but I felt like it was like really serious, really raw. And it just wasn't. Like there's just a lot of things I've seen with Capricorn that like, well, for example, like I have dealt with a lot of death in my life, and I know a lot of people have it. And for me, I'm like, I remember used to thinking it was it is a big deal, but like I remember used to thinking it was like this, like not to say taboo, but like it was just something that was much more like serious. And now it's like, well, yeah, it's a serious thing, but I feel much more like normalized to it. I think that's one thing I look at, like with the Capricorn, like literally Jupiter and Capricorn every day was like, normalize this, normalize that, normalize this, normalize that. And I like the normalizing for Capricorn, but I wonder what the Mars and Venus conjunction of like, what are we normalizing here?
Well, yeah, it's also more kind of like like there's a concrete manifestation of that conjunction when it's in something like Capricorn, as opposed like it's more tangible just because of the earthiness of it. And so I think it's more, especially with like the Venus retrograde. I mean, come on, like it's just so like when Venus is retrograde, like at least when it stations retrograde, it's super visible, right? Like Venus is going to be in like shining bright in the sky in that like month leading up to it,
especially when, like she's in Libra too. She's pretty much like almost like a max elongation.
Yeah. Oh nice. Yeah, totally. And so I mean that translates to like relationships being kind of like out in the open, and you're like you're dealing with these things in like the visible, tangible world. It's less of like an interior kind of like, how do you feel inside kind of thing. And I remember like with the Venus retrograde in Scorpio back in late 2018, which was like, oh my God, some of the worst astro weather for me ever. I had a breakup like right around when Venus was like going retrograde, or maybe it was retrograde in Scorpio. And, you know, in those couple months leading up to it, I was like in a relationship. And Scorpio is my first house. I was like in a relationship for the first time. And kind of like, you know, we like hit the 6-month point, and it was just like, whoa, this is like a whole new kind of experience for me. And it's like out in the open and visible, and like I'm dealing with it in these very like concrete ways, which like a visible planet. But with that visibility, there's also this kind of like attention, and you're more kind of you realize the faults and the problems more because of the visibility. And then the retrograde, you like figure them out, and sometimes that means like ending something. But I think like the Earth combined with that, it's like I just think people are going to have more kind of it's like constraint, like how can we actually make this work? Like the constraints around relationships are going to be more kind of I don't actually know where I'm going with this, but so I'm just trying to think about like the earthiness of that conjunction. Yeah, if you have any thoughts.
The earthiness of that, well, because I've been really thinking about the last time. So so the last time Venus retrograded was interesting in Capricorn, because for those of you listening that don't know this, Venus is retrograding in Capricorn at the end of the year. She does this every 8 years. Venus retrogrades in the same sign every 8 years. Well, that has only started since 2005 and 2006. Venus was stationing in Aquarius before that, but now has been stationed in Capricorn. Well, the last one was in December of 2013 and January and February of 2014. Do you remember what happened after that spring? What after that winter? So that spring of 2014, Mars went retrograde in Libra.
Oh my God.
Squaring Uranus and Aries, squaring Pluto in Capricorn, opposite Uranus and Aries, squaring Jupiter in Cancer. That's the other thing. So like, I look back at that Venus retrograde actually setting off what 2014 was for a lot of people. That was how it was for me too. That was like, I remember that was like I remember that was my senior year, and there was this girl that I was like kind of seeing, and then I forgot what happened. Like I think we stopped talking, but then pretty much I found out the whole time we were seeing each other, she was actually seeing someone else, and then was like, I'm actually dating this guy. Like we saw each other at a concert, and it was like a really like a depressing concert. It was actually a really good show too. But it was very Venus and Capricorn of just like, oh, like I didn't know. I played it's like when you play Monopoly and you lose. Like that's what it felt like. It was like I played the game and I fucking lost. That's what it felt like.
This time, so I mean, compared to that, like this is like way more kind
worse.
I mean,
it's on Pluto.
Mars are like fucking in the sky for like a while. Like,
but the difference of being in a state, the difference of Venus stationing versus retrograde versus direct, though. That's what I'm really looking at is Venus first stationing on Pluto. I don't think we get.
Yeah, I mean that's gonna be messy.
Yeah,
and like the questions about like deception and like
paranoia.
Like, do you actually know what's going on? And then when it conjoins Mars, though, I feel like I guess that could show up in a few ways. Like it could be kind of you're just gonna give it a shot anyway, or like maybe you had your kind of like shadowy like anxiety about something, and then it's like you just kind of go for it anyway. Because then Venus and Mars do this weird thing where like Venus is super slow when it starts moving forward again, and so Mars like actually catches up to Venus, moves past Venus, but then Venus starts speeding up, and then it passes Mars, and so there's like multiple conjunctions when that happens, and that makes me think that there's kind of like a relationship stuff is just going to be very like present for that whole period of that whole couple months. And there's going to be a lot of like revisitation of the stuff, like not only when Venus is retrograde, but also like after Venus is retrograde. And
well, because
she like out of shadow.
Well, because Mars and Venus, Venus leaves shadow when it conjoins Mars on Pluto, but then they go into Aquarius together and hit Saturn. So it's like, And so what I thought was interesting is they actually conjoin like opposite the degrees that they conjoined in Leo. So there's this like there's going to be this like really weird look at that.
Yeah, totally.
Fuck, what was I just about to ask you? Shit. You just said something that like really struck a chord in me. I got too excited about everything else that you were saying.
Oh, you're nice.
Well, fuck, what did you see? Like I think this Mars Venus, I'm really excited to hear about the toxic relationship stories for people. Like, like people are just gonna be like, you're like, yeah, I'm seeing my ex, and it's like, well, I keep looking at Mars and Venus going back and forth, and so, you know what I love about Essential Dignity is Mars, Venus, and Saturn together, and just how Mars and Venus are like the toxic couple, and like Venus and Saturn are like the traditional couple. And there's this like it's and it's super funny too, just talking about Mars and Venus, how we said in the mutual reception in like Libra and Scorpio, and how not only looking at times when they're in reception, but when they're in this conjunction and they're in this Saturn ruled sign, where this is kind of like where typically what they do is much more pleasure oriented, not so much sustainably oriented. Like it's very like, ooh, fun, let's
like right pushing. Now, well, I mean that's like a Mars Venus conjunction thing for like when you have that natally, it's like, yeah, you have a lot of like relationship opportunities, but you're not like you're probably not in a long-term relationship, you know. It like makes the sustainability.
I have no idea what you're talking about. Yeah, having Mars and Venus and Gemini is a whole nother thing for me, but yeah, Mars and Venus is so like, that's what. Well, the other thing too is with Mars and I'm confused with Mars and Capricorn is what is Mars and Capricorn like with Venus and Capricorn on top of it? Because Venus has no actual, I
said literally.
Well, it's like as Mars is in Capricorn, they're like where you have an exalted Mars, where it's like, you know, what are we, I guess, initiating and acting on? What are we? Mars and Capricorn is like that hustle culture mentality, I always feel like. And with Venus on top of it, is that like good? Is that fun?
For Mars.
Is it good for Venus though?
No.
Why don't you think so?
Well, I mean, it's like, you know, malefics can benefit from benefics, but not the other way around.
Venus will be enclosed by malefics. Holy shit.
Well, I mean, yeah, it'll be in a Saturn ruled sign conjunct Mars. So I think it's like,
well, after when they go into Aquarius, I was just thinking Venus will be actually enclosed for like a month. I didn't even think of it that way.
That's like not, that's kind of a stress test, I think, for a lot of relationships.
Oh yeah. Like there's
Venus retrogrades always do that anyway, but
Well, this is why I fucking love Tim Dillon, because he's just like, I swear to God. So I was talking to Kelsey about this. Jessica Reed, this is the girl I want to talk to. Like she's a comedian, and I was listening to this Tim Dillon guy. He talks about like so many jokes. So many of his jokes are about society and what everything's kind of going through. And he said, he's like, God, like fear, like after COVID, just don't like stay in the same relationship you got in lockdown with after this ends. And I keep looking at all this Capricorn stuff. Like truly, why are people still holding on to like this old, especially old, like old relationships are dying at that point?
Yeah, I think that's a good delineation of that. And also the way that like that all that stuff is like in the same sign that was like so active, or like in the same pair of signs, Capricorn and Aquarius, that was so activated during the pandemic. My roommate got into like a relationship in February, and then just became like super codependent, like through the pandemic.
That's a lot of people did.
Yeah, they ended up moving in together after like 6 months because it was like pandemic. And I'm just like, honestly, I have no envy of a situation like that, just because I feel like that's not. I mean, I'm sure for some people it can work, but it just seems like a kind of bad way to start. And like when there's not enough choosing. There's not enough like, oh, I want this. It's like, this is what I have.
I had a relationship one time where she moved in with me, like I think it was like a week or two after we met each other. It was awful. It was awful. It was fucking. That was the worst. It was the worst. I know.
What's wrong with you?
I was 19. I had a man bun. I didn't know what I was doing with my life. This was actually undercut. It was actually. That was the same time I started my YouTube. It was
Las Vegas Cam 1.0.
Denver. It was Denver.
Oh,
Cam.
was it Denver? Okay.
First gen Denver Cam.
First gen.
We're on third gen Vegas Cam now. Yeah, no, I heard about that too. And I'm like, that's the thing. It's like, man, I hate being isolated and alone, but it sure beats being, because like I lived with 8 people in Denver. Loved them to death. They're all great, but I wouldn't want to be locked in a house with them over lockdown. None of that. Yeah. Or even a relationship. So maybe
like, I mean, Venus retrograde is like, if you feel stuck, you will get unstuck. Like if you think about Venus as like as glue and like that kind of social and relationship connectivity, like Venus retrograde is getting unstuck from things that feel like too sticky and like,
and Mars is on it too the whole time. So it's like,
right. So like separation central. I feel like
that's cheating. Oh no, like literally. You said cheating, right? Oh yeah, no. Like it's like that's why I'm so ready for these toxic relationship stories. Like I might just get myself in a toxic relationship.
Yeah, let me get a piece of that.
Oh yeah, that sounds fun. Just like you look at a transit. It's like when you look at a sunny day and you're like, I want to go outside and play. Like I look at a transit like that. Like that's why this Mars Venus. Like I didn't have sex with this Mars Venus conjunction, which I'm glad I did it now. But I look at something like that, like I want to enjoy that. But I also think, yeah, cheating, a lot of it's just gonna be juicy. It's like people live for that shit no matter, like there's a reason why people aren't in toxic relationships, because they're not enjoying it somehow. You know what I mean? There's a level of, drama that I think that's what I'm so excited about, is the Mars Venus drama. Because also too, what I'm really excited about this Venus retrograde is how many people our age who are in the media have these Capricorn things, and that Mars Venus is gonna, like Jake Paul, his stellium's getting hit. Alex Jones, he's someone else, but there's gonna be so much drama in the whole
and I think world. I think some of those people will probably like turn away from their public profile. Like I think Jake Paul has that Capricorn stuff in his midheaven, doesn't he?
Yes, but he also has like Jupiter on Neptune on his midheaven.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and I don't know. I could see that being like Venus retrograde is, again, like getting unstuck from whatever kind of situation.
I think his ruling planet he's a Taurus rising, because he's a moon in Taurus. Wow. Yeah. Huh. Well, I wonder if 2013, 2014 was when he got really popular, got really big. Huh. Yeah. I'm just excited for the drama of it all.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely that. But then the Saturnian quality, like the more subdued quality of Capricorn, I wonder if I wonder how that kind of plays into
Subdued
it.
doesn't like subdued. I
Like,
feel like isn't Capricorn labeled a bestial sign? Like isn't Capricorn like bestial and like every time I read about Capricorn, it's like what Rhetorius is like Rhetorius is so funny. Same thing with like I've been reading some of these books. I'm like, yo, this is way too much to read right now in terms of just like sex related shit.
yeah,
They're like, here's the fornicators, the sodomers, the cheaters, the liars.
Yes, Firmicus is really fun for that. Like he has some really nasty things to say about like Mars Venus conjunctions. Actually,
I haven't read Firmicus, unfortunately. I've been reading.
We just read him in Austin's class.
Oh, really? How's that going?
Yeah. It's good. Yeah. Yeah, we're talking about nodes and like when planets are conjunct nodes, and it's been kind of like opening up a whole kind of just like different way
Portal.
of seeing, you know, any time that you just like look at a chart and you realize like, oh, I'm seeing different things now and like thinking differently about this. There's like all those kinds of like level up moments that you feel. I remember, yeah, that's kind of all I had to say about that. But the class has been great. I'm always in some class.
Yeah, I know. After taking the STA and not having anything, I've been thinking about taking a programming class.
Ooh.
Yeah, I know a lot of my clients who have Mars and Gemini are programmers.
Cool. Yeah, I mean that kind of lines up with your third house transit right now.
Yes.
Saturn and opposing your Mercury and everything.
Yeah. I feel like I don't know. I don't want to get left behind in tech, but I also think tech is a waste if in 15 years it's all going to go to shit. But I want to ask too, what's your opinion about the Jupiter? Just to kind of close out here too, the Jupiter, Neptune, Jupiter, Aries thing.
You mean how it like goes into Aries and then comes back?
Well, it's kind of like January and February comparative to April and May are two completely different years. Those are two completely different realities. And I guess going from the Venus retrograde, or I guess what are you looking at? What do you look? Jupiter conjoining Neptune and Pisces, and then the Jupiter Aries ingress.
Well, I mean, it's like so it goes from so wet and, you know, connected and kind of feelsy. And then it's like, okay, now what are you going to do about it? Like you have all these kinds of like inspiring things to think about with like Jupiter and Pisces and Neptune. And then when it goes into Aries, there's this real shift into like a practicality. And, you know, with Neptune, there's very little focus given to focus, like not really any focus at all, and just kind of like drifting off and like dreaming, right? And then when it goes into Aries, it gets dry and it gets like clear-headed, like a very kind of Aries imagery there. So yeah, it's gonna be more like directed, like that Jupiterian kind of you know, philosophical side of things is going to get way more, okay, like I had these ideas, now what am I going to do about it?
Yeah, I like that. Well, you also mentioned Venus in Capricorn earlier about Venus sticking things together in the glue, and things being sticky with Venus and Jupiter and Neptune and Pisces, and things like really coming to get like what got separated maybe during the Mars Venus conjunction gets all glued back together at the end there.
Totally. I mean, it's like forgiveness is definitely
forgiveness is a great, well, I've
compassion,
been surrendering, just, well, like what I like about Pisces, and I've talked to I was talking to Hugh about this because we're just talking about like Mars shit, we're just like fucking going off on shit, but it's just like what's funny about like fights or getting in a fight with someone, like especially as a guy, like I just got in a lot of fights in high school, and in most of the time, depending on the context, usually if there's something weird, it's like you can like hate someone, you get in this fight, but when you get it out, there's like this peace. Like, have you ever got like a fight with someone and like after you're like it's out of your system. It's good. It's and then there's this sense of like, you know, reconciliation, things like, you know, coming together. And I've always kind of, and I kind of looked at the, you know, almost all of that Neptune and Pisces stuff of kind of like, you know, now that we're on the other side of it, now that we're on, you know, or at least heading towards the other side of it, where can we all kind of come together and mesh together? That was a good way of putting it. I like that.
What do you think about the Jupiter stuff there? Like other than the Venus and all that, but like what does the Aries part mean to you?
I think you're gonna see. I'm excited of Mars Jupiter only because I think well I think a lot of things about there's a traditional way of looking at Mars Jupiter conjoining in Aries, you know what I mean, and then there's a what we kind of look at it in today, and I think like I'm curious about the last when we had Mars ingress into Taurus and we had like the whole insurrection January 6th thing. I think you might see another one of those, Mars on top of Jupiter and Aries, people being like, we're gonna do some wild crazy shit. Well, I think you're gonna see people take really big actions. I think with Jupiter, well, here's the thing. Well, again, I think we'll find life on another planet, or like aliens will come alive or something, but I think there's something that clicks that just initiates like Jupiter Aries of like, it's like the Jupiter and Pisces is the fuel. It's like, well, I mean, like when you microdose, when you get a good microdose or like a Molly trip in, and you're like, I have been washed of my sins. I'm ready to go out into the world and do my thing. Mm-hmm. And I think, what's just weird, and this has been super hard. I don't know if you could, I'm sure you could relate to this. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too. Of like, as an astrologer talking about like, all right, it's going to be a shitty winter, but just like, fucking trust me, it's going to get really crazy and good at the end. You just got to get through it. Cause it's just like, again, that dynamic of how bad it is in December versus like how crazy good it is on that Venus Jupiter conjunction. Like I keep looking at them like that's too good. You know what I mean? Like that is us beyond auspiciously. It is suspiciously good. You know what I mean? Am I fucking wrong though? Like,
no, I think you're absolutely right. I think you're absolutely right. And I was just thinking too about like the beginning of Aries where Mars and Jupiter conjoin is like, it's not only Mars's sign, but it's also Mars's decan and it's Jupiter's term.
Oh, yes, it is.
Yeah. So there's like so much, and Jupiter's triplicity too. So there's like so much kind of, there's so much good stuff going on there, but that the difference between like a Mars Venus conjunction, or excuse me, a Jupiter Venus conjunction and like Jupiter Mars conjunction, like, gosh, I think that there's like a kind of just confidence thing with that one, like you have with the Mars Jupiter conjunction, you have the sort of connectedness of the Venus Jupiter conjunction right before, and then you have and the sort of peace that comes with that, and then right after that you have the Mars Jupiter conjunction, which is like, oh, like I can do this, or like I can be this.
Can I analogize it in a way I think you might get? It's it's like post nut clarity. There's like nut, and then it's like, yes, this is great. Let's go.
Or like the day after, like you roll Molly, and then you like the next day you have that kind of like
afterglow. Let's go. Let's do this. Feeling great.
Yeah, and like the best sex is not actually, like, at least for me, like that afterglow sex is like that's what I think.
That's why I think Mars Jupiter is the afterglow sex. Like you get laid and you're like, yeah, like you're on top of the world now. Well, so I wanted to mention something because this will be a funny note to leave off on for people to like spin their heads about if people are still listening at this point. I was reading Dorotheus. And I might have told you about this.
As we do.
As I'm casual. So, oh my God. So so those posts that are like Leo sun, Libra moon, Sagittarius, it's like a picture from a TV show. I haven't liked any of them, but some random person did It's Always Sunny. And it was literally me for every single, I've literally told you these three things. Sagittarius rising is, oh, well, I was just glancing at War and Peace. And I'm like, that's so like, I was just casually reading Dorotheus of Sidon. Yeah. And he opens up with the 12-letter alphabet. Did you know that? Yeah.
Is it about the body, or
he goes? He like explicitly states he's like the first house. It rules the it's the head, and the head is the first thing that comes out of the birth. So Aries rules the head. So Aries rules the first house. It was straight up 12-letter alphabet. First thing in Dorotheus. I was like, holy fuck. And then I don't know. I was skimming through. I was trying to find this the other night because I think I was looking at the back, and at the very end, it's like one of the last chapters of Dorotheus. He brings up degree theory, and who is it? Paul of Alex. Yeah. Paulus. He has a whole degree theory in that book.
I mean that's actually pretty like that has precedent. It's just like it doesn't mean that each degree is the same as a sign, but
Well,
it does mean that
there's degree theory nowadays, which is sign, zodiac sign based versus planet based. My question is, what happened to the planet based one? And also the 12-letter alphabet being like opening up Dorotheus kind of cracked me up, because I kind of wanted to bring that up on Astro Twitter, be like, hey, did you guys know actually
like, tweet at Chris Brennan
at Chris Brennan? Hey Chris, I don't know if you know this.
Well, yeah, I mean, but we were learning about that in the horary class, where it's like signs do not equal houses except in medical astrology when we're talking about body parts, and so I think that that's probably what he's doing in that part of the book.
Oh, that's a good point, because a lot of this book is, the more you read through this, you're like, this guy's kind of weird. It kind of talks about like a lot of like weird things. Like a lot of it is just like marriage and kids and being born.
You mean like all that like life stuff?
All that weird fucking life stuff that no one gives a shit about. The only thing that like really there was to talk about in like 1 AD, like the first year one.
This is people still asking the same questions,
Yeah, so well, I guess to wrap this up, any other things you want to mention? What do you think about it all? Closing thoughts. Well, this is one thing too, because this is what I want to get Cameron's thoughts on, is it's something I really want to do with this podcast, is like, again, casual astrology, and also like talking about astrology and not talking about the astrology. Like what are your thoughts, any thoughts or opinions on astrology as a practice in today's day and age? I know we touched a little bit about being, trend setting or influencing, but I mean, where are your thoughts of how astrology is used nowadays?
Yeah. I mean, obviously we use astrology for practical reasons. Like we want certain outcomes, or we want to be able to like mold our fate in a certain way. And that's definitely like kind of at the heart of a lot of it. But I think sometimes what gets discounted, or like what we lose when we kind of focus on that too much, is this more kind of like reflective side of it, or like not looking so much for the answer to everything in it, and more like using like looking at a chart as sort of this kind of contemplative space, this like just space to kind of like think about things in a similar way as like you would when you're praying, or like in a sort of religious way. And so I think that maybe in terms of like where astrology is going, and what I think there's like potential for, is like that kind of religious application of it. And I don't mean, I was actually just reading the other day, there's this, I think the book is underneath my laptop right now, like setting it up. But it's this old sociologist named Emil Durkheim, and he writes the book is the elementary forms of religious life, and he's like basically just analyzing like how religion works. And he has this whole section where he's comparing religion to magic. And what he says is that the difference is basically that religion is a collective thing, and magic is like an isolating thing. It's something that people do like on their own. Maybe they have clients as magicians, but for the most part, like, it doesn't, you can do magic without like agreeing with people about like the magic that you're doing, right? It's just
I've been on Twitter lately.
But so that's the interesting thing. And he says like, he's writing in like the mid 1800s, but he speculates that like maybe there will come a day when the only religion left is these kinds of like isolated, like, these isolated practices, and like being like this kind of magical, like self-oriented, or like, you don't have to talk to other people in order to do it. And so I think the way that it's actually happened is that we are talking to each other about it, and there is a kind of connection around it. And it's interesting. Like, I think that magic and like astrology is, I think of as like really a subset of magic, or like a sort of toolbox with which to do magic. You are seeing now that, there is community around it, and there are actually people talking about techniques and things. And I think that's really awesome. I just hope that there's like still something kind of occult about it, that I hope we leave some things secret, and like don't just kind of show it all.
Are you saying that you want to be a gatekeeper? Do you want to gatekeep astrology?
Well, I don't but the gatekeeping even implies like that there's like a public to kind of take in the information potentially. But I'm talking more like, no, like like I want to have my own conversations with the divine, you know what I mean? Like I don't, like there's some things that I want to keep to myself, not because I don't want to like share it with the world, but because it's mine, you know? Like this is my practice of astrology. And I think that that's something that is a little bit lost in like the social media context of everything.
Yeah.
Is like how do you really do your own practice, and like instead of just like saying what other people are saying, you know what I mean? Like so easy to kind of like become an astrologer and just like say what other people say, and that's like that's not it, you know?
It's just to repeat, you know. Well, like there's a lot of people that repeat information, and then there's people that actually, you know, will tell you something, right? I notice a lot of people will repeat the same talking points to you, and they won't actually question what those talking points come from, or the actually question their sources, right? Which but that what a almost kind of bleak and scary insight, that book of like just kind of all forming into isolating practices. Like I don't like, oh,
and it's cool that astrology is not an isolating practice.
Yeah.
Like it's cool that there is that connection around it, but also like I don't know. Well,
well, you know, that's just it puts into perspective how maybe people saw the future of how things were going to go, and you know how we are right now. But I completely agree. Something that I don't like necessarily, while I'm all about the, you know, abundance of occult, magic, astrology things that are happening, I think you phrased that really well, of, you know, keeping the occult, like keeping it like hidden, keeping it from, I mean, that's like when you actually get into an occultation definition in astronomy too. It's like when literally a planet goes over in front of the sun, when it literally occults it, blocks it, right? Ruling stuff like the eighth house. I think keeping it that way is something that should be, well, I think that's part of the tradition, and part of like this is something too about, you know, when it came to like a lot of the traditional astrologers talking about how like this stuff needs to be, you know, kept very protected and, you know, passed on in a certain way. And so I think, I don't know, that's a good insight to take away from, as far as just like where you think everything is at, is the sense of, you know, what's public, what's not, what's community, what's not. I see you're very channeling Saturn lately. Well, with that being said, I guess that's the podcast. So thank you so much for being on this episode, Drew. I really appreciate this. This was a very fantastic conversation. Where can everyone find you?
You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Anthrosophist, which is ANTHROSOPHIST. And you can check out my website. I guess if maybe Cam can put it in the description. It's rkastrology.com. I do a lot of electional astrology. And if you want me to read your birth chart, I can do that too. So
this is the guy I send to. If you guys are my clients, this is the guy I send you to for electional astrology.
Oh, dope.
I don't get a lot, but when I do, I send them to you.
Cool.
Sweet. Thank you guys for listening, and tune in next time. I'll talk to you later.